Hello everybody and welcome to part 15 of Kerbal Space Program. The journey continues. We start in space with our orbital science outpost, the Aristotle, the doomed Aristotle. Yes, it has had its card marked. It will soon be replaced by something bigger, something newer, something shinier, something which as yet doesn't have a name, which is kind of a developing theme for this series, but never mind. We're not quite ready to throw this thing on the scrap heap just yet, though. We still have to build the other space station so that it can take over all of the Aristotle's functions, and the science lab here is still pretty full of data ready to convert into science. It's about 2/3 full. We're not going to get through all of that because the less data the lab has in it, the less efficient it becomes, but I'd like to put a serious dent in that, so we need to keep it going for just a little while longer. Ultimately, though, at some point, this space station does have a date with Kerbin's atmosphere. We are going to deorbit it. After, of course, we've transferred anything we can reuse on the new space station across. As I said, it's not going to be for a little while, but I'd like to get the ball rolling now if I can. Make the deorbit a little bit simpler, so we're going to get rid of a couple of superfluous bits. The Aristotle has its power module now. We don't need that utility module we used to initially provide power to our fledgling space station. That can go. Also, the lander probe that we've currently got docked. The technology there is pretty archaic by now, so we're going to get rid of that, as well as the adapter it uses to dock with the space station. Happily, though, we can kill two birds with one stone and use that probe to deorbit the utility module. So we get our probe docked, we undock the utility module, pull it away, and after a little bit of indecisive manoeuvring, we do get it in position, and we make our deorbit burn. Now, this whole thing initially was a real pain because when I first tried to do it, I came across a bug that I've only come across one other time in Kerbal Space Program, and that's where the docking nodes get confused and you can't decouple them. Now, there are two ways you can fix this. First of all, you can manually edit the text in the save file, but it's a little long-winded. Also, the procedure is kind of impractical, given what else we've got going on in this save. The second is to download a tool and fix it that way, and that worked perfectly well, once I'd actually managed to edit the right save file. Anyway, our probe utility module combo, having survived remarkably well through re-entry, also survives remarkably well upon impact. We'll recover that, we'll cart it off to the historians of our space program who can ponder these relics of a bygone age. We're not quite done with the Aristotle for today, however. Having deorbited two parts, we're now going to take a new part up, but it's a part we can reuse on the new space station, so we're not adding to our overall task. To this end, we are launching our Mark III shuttle. Greyfried Kerman is in command, and she is joined by Erison Jebloff and our brand new recruit, Korkin Kerman. Now, at the moment, aboard the Aristotle Science Lab, we just have the one Kerbal, which is all well and good, but with two Kerbals, you process the science twice as quickly. Now, just having the one hasn't really held us back. We've managed to go through all the science at a steady rate, and in fact, we probably wouldn't have been able to keep the science labs stocked up as we have done if we did have two Kerbals, at least not until recently. Now, however, we want to drain that science lab as quickly as we possibly can. So we're going to go up, stick another scientist aboard. That'll be 4 Kerbals aboard the space station. We've only got emergency return vehicle seats for 3, so we're going to take up another ERV, attach that, and we can just transfer those to the new space station at the appropriate time. Just before I did this mission, I hired 2 new Kerbals, a scientist to replace Jebloff whilst he's up on the Aristotle, and also Korkin, whom you've already met, because we needed 2 pilots for this mission, or at least we did the way I was originally going to do it, but then I realised that wouldn't work, so we switched to the shuttle, and we don't need the second pilot, but we're going to need new Kerbals before too long, so yeah, welcome aboard, Korkin. Anyway, with the shuttle securely docked to the Aristotle, we open up that cargo bay, displaying our brand new ERV, and now Korkin Kerman is going to get out. We had to give him something to do. And he's going to transfer across to the ERV and then pilot it across to the docking port on the opposite side of the science lab. Now, I don't know what has happened to my ability to manoeuvre a spacecraft today. It's kind of gone to pot. Just lots of little errors. I mean, nothing's gone disastrously wrong. We do get the ERV across and docked with the space station, but yeah, it's not going well. Anyway, with the ERV docked, we can transfer Jebloff across to the science lab, we can transfer Korkin back to the space shuttle, and our mission is complete. Just before we go, we top up the ERV's monopropellant tank, we check to see if there's anything else that needs topping up, and then it is time for us to depart. Now a threesome, our Kerbals start to make their way back to the KSC. The journey down goes by without a hitch, we get ourselves lined up, and before too long we are touching down on the runway for what is a very nice landing, if I may say so. My ability to land seems to have returned just as my ability to manoeuvre has deserted me, so, swings and roundabouts and all that. So we close the chapter on the Aristotle for today. That will just remain in orbit, doing its thing, hopefully as quickly as possible. And now it's out with the old, and in with the new. We are launching from the KSC with one of our Brunel Mark I rockets, Corkin Kerman taking command of his first mission, and he is joined by Erison and our new science officer, Grados. Underneath the fairing we have a bunch of modules for our new space station, 3 to be exact, because we need to crack on with building this thing. We need it to be maybe not finished, but certainly functional by the time our interplanetary craft arrive back at Kerbin. I said during the last episode that one of the reasons we were building this new space station was to take advantage of some of the advanced technologies that KSP Interstellar brings. The other reason is because, well, we can't really dock 2 interplanetary craft comfortably at the Aristotle, so we're going to need something that's a little bit grander on scale. Plus, we're going to need to build at least one new vehicle to take us to Eve so that we can land, also to get a manned mission out to Moho. So a lot of activity, and our new station is going to be the hub for it all. So it's going to be busy. I'm dreading to think what the frame rate's going to be. I mean, the Aristotle was bad enough when you've just got one of the interplanetary craft docked at it. So with 2, maybe 3, possibly even 4 docked, yeah, let's cross that bridge when we come to it, shall we? Anyway, as our crew arrive at the new station, they begin their manoeuvres to start getting things into place, which is complicated by the fact they have a very long, very heavy weight attached to their nose, so I had to do this very gently just to make sure the craft didn't start turning this way and that. To start with then, we're going to attach this whole assembly to the bottom of the space station. The science lab on the end will be staying where it is. That's the science lab which comes with KSP Interstellar, it's just basically an improved version of the original science lab. We're going to just leave that there in one chunk for the time being because we want to move our utility module. It's currently sat where I want something to go, so I'm going to move that. I've got everything planned out. It's just getting everything into place. Corkin Kerman transfers across to the cupola module because without that utility module our space station has no way to keep itself steady, and then the rest of our crew just move that utility module round to the opposite docking port of that node. Corkin Kerman rejoins his crewmates and they manoeuvre their craft down and redock it with the bottom of the space station. As I said, the science lab is where it needs to be, so we leave that behind and we manoeuvre our 2 remaining modules up to the docking port that's just been vacated, and that is where we are going to deposit our habitation module. With that attached, the only module left is our general purpose docking node, so we manoeuvre that around to the side of the space station, we get that bolted on, and with that our construction efforts for this mission are finished. Our space station is starting to take shape, and I think it's starting to look the part, but our Kerbals don't have much time to hang around admiring their handiwork. They've got to get back to Kerbin. Having departed the space station, our Kerbals don't burn straight for re-entry, as is sometimes the case when I come back to Kerbin with the Brunel CSM, because that would mean we come down on the night side, and we've already had to do our initial docking in the dark. I'm trying not to make it twice in one mission. The sun has just risen as we perform our deorbit burn, so we make our way through re-entry in bright Kerbal sunlight before splashing down in Kerbin's oceans. Well, we launched 2 missions to our old space station. I think it's only fair we launch 2 missions to our new one as well. So we are blasting off from the KSC, again with one of our Brunel Mark I rockets. Greyfried Kerman is back in charge, and she is joined by Erison and Grados. Our fairing is looking positively dull and drab compared to some of our more recent launches, but that's probably a good thing. The payload is also a lot lighter. It's a little bit shorter and a lot lighter, so hopefully that'll make manoeuvring a little bit easier this time. Where it's such a light payload, I have toned down the solid rocket boosters. I notched down their thrust, and also we're taking a bit of fuel out. They're on about 90% of each. When I was playing about with this in the VAB, I did find out that with this payload, with the solid rocket boosters full, more than 40% of our takeoff mass would have been the fuel in the solid rocket motors, which just seems a little ridiculous to me. But maybe that's just me. Anyway, we've got 2 modules under that fairing, and once we've attached those, our space station is pretty much functional. Well, I mean, it's functional at the moment in that we could chuck Kerbals aboard and it would do everything we need it to do, but I'd like to get it a little bit closer to how I envisage it ending up before we start doing that. And besides, as I said previously, we need to let the Aristotle run down some of that science first. Arriving at the space station, I mess up this manoeuvre a little bit, I start burning too late, we go flying a little way past it, not too much, and we didn't hit anything, so that's good, but once we've arrested our relative velocity, I've just decided I'm going to leave it here until we get into the sunlight, because I don't want to muck about in the dark again. With the star Kerbal illuminating us, we can get to work. We start off with docking that first module onto the bottom of the space station, and that's little more than a pressurized structural spacer, because onto the bottom of that we're going to dock another 6-way node, and I want a bit of space between that and the other node, just because of how the craft are going to dock to the space station. It's we're going to be better off if we do have a bit of room between the two of them. With that attached, we move on to our second module. Now this is just a docking arm. Again, it's little more than a spacer. It tapers down towards the docking port, and this is just in case we have any bulky craft. You've got things protruding from the hull very close to the docking port. It just means we won't bash those against the space station and destroy any delicate components. It's just that where the faces of our multi-purpose docking node are quite flat, it could cause that problem to occur. For instance, we'd have trouble docking our Mark II shuttle to that node. With that done, we have finished our station assembly for this mission, and we can once again sit back and admire our handiwork for a moment. I think we're done with our construction efforts for today. There's still a few more things to do, but I think it's time we move on to something else. I don't want this to get too repetitive, but before we do that, there's just the small matter of getting our Kerbals home. Once again, we don't burn straight for re-entry. Once again, it's because we'll be coming down to the night side. But this time, when we perform our deorbit burn, I make a note of where we are in relation to the KSC, because I do want to start trying to land the command module there, so I'm going to use this as a bit of a benchmark. We come up very far short this time, but it's a useful data point as we splash down in Kerbin's oceans. So we shift our focus over to the Galileo, our interplanetary craft currently in orbit around Eve, and we've got a bit of a problem with this craft, and I'll try and explain because it's quite illustrative and, well, it explains why I choose the pre-transfer burn parking orbits that I do. I have explained this very briefly before, but I thought for any newer players watching, it might be worth going into a bit more detail. Now, I'd like to get the Galileo home as soon as possible. Well, I'd like to get all of my craft home as soon as possible. But for the Galileo, and also for the Ptolemy, although that's less of an issue for various reasons, there isn't an optimal transfer window for a while, like a year and a half, 2 years from now. I can get it back sooner, but it becomes a case of how much delta V I'm willing to throw at the issue, or more to the point, how much delta V I have to throw at the issue. Now, working that out and leaving myself a decent safety margin, a viable transfer window opens up in about 75 days, but there's a very major problem with that. You see, this kind of manoeuvre is at its most efficient when you're burning tangentially to your orbit, basically when you're pointing in the prograde direction, and the further you drift from that, the less efficient it becomes. Now, the amount of time it would take this craft to put out enough delta V to perform that manoeuvre is more than half of our current orbital period, which would mean we'd start our manoeuvre pointing at more than 90 degrees away from prograde. Also, we might push ourselves into the atmosphere of Eve, which opens up a whole different can of worms. Basically, it's a non-starter. Unless we want to wait an age, our only choice is to raise ourselves into a higher orbit, a slower orbit, which means we have a chance to make that burn. But this is generally a less efficient way of doing things. It means we have less delta V for the transfer, that pushes our window back. It's a game of balancing inefficiencies here. Fortunately for us, we have some fuel which hasn't been taken into account on our current delta V indicator, and that is the tank at the back of the craft, which is reserved for refuelling any landers, but we don't have any landers, so we are going to use that to raise our orbit. Also, it's fuel oxidizer mix, which means we get to use our Lanter engines in their afterburning mode. So first of all, we disable all the other fuel tanks and we enable that fuel oxidizer fuel tank. That's just going to let us know how much delta V we have to play with, and we're going to be using about half of it for each of the burns. We get those engines switched over to fuel oxidizer mix, we activate them, and we're not going to hang around here. We're going to go straight into that first burn, and I hope this is going to push us high enough. because if it doesn't, we would have been better off just extending the burn, using some of our regular fuel, because to raise your orbit in one manoeuvre is more efficient than to raise it in two. Again, this idea of minimising inefficiencies comes into play. So our first burn raised our apoapsis up to about 800 kilometres. We start our circularisation burn knowing we'll have just about enough delta V to complete it, and we finish the second burn of the manoeuvre with 37 metres per second of delta V to spare. So the Galileo is now in a much better position to make that burn. I'm not sure I'm going to take that window as soon as it opens up. I mean, the burn is still going to be a bit of an arseache. And this was the first window to open up, but also it's the craft with the shortest journey time, so there's not quite the pressure to get it underway as there is with the other craft. Regardless, we will be leaving the Galileo here for now, and we will be leaving this episode here for today. I hope you've enjoyed it. Join me next time. We've got a few more bits to send up to our new space station. We're going to have to start fast forwarding. I know I said the window for the Galileo opens up in 75 days. We've got an optimal window for our dual probe 20 days after that. And we've got another workable transfer window for the Ptolemy about 30 days after that. But for now, thanks for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.